Hi everyone, so a couple of months ago I was thrilled to discover that there's now a page about me on Atlantipedia. Now if you're interested in Atlantis and you've done any research online, you've probably come across Atlantipedia. It's a website which basically serves as an encyclopedia all about Atlantis, hence the name Atlantipedia. So this website doesn't argue for any specific theory, although the owner of the website does have his own theory, but it just has thousands of entries about various different subjects to do with the research of Atlantis, like places, expressions like Pillars of Heracles, and also researchers who have proposed theories about Atlantis. And since I've been writing quite a bit about Atlantis for Greek Reporter since last April, I was pleasantly surprised to see that there's now some stuff about me on Atlantipedia. I have a whole page about me, and also my articles are mentioned in the page about the Minoan hypothesis, which is the theory that I support. So when I read it though, I was a bit disappointed by what I saw. Now, I'm not disappointed because the owner of the website didn't agree with me. That does come across in the summary of my views. He doesn't agree with the theory. I'm not disappointed about that. It happens, everyone has the right to agree or disagree with what they like, depending on their own personal analysis of the theory. I completely respect that, and I've had people disagreeing with me for the last 10 years or whatever. So, that's fine. But what I wasn't so happy about was that the summary of my theories contains some crucial inaccuracies. So I'll just go through some of them. So, for example, the very start of the article about me is Caleb Howells is a British teacher of English with a passion for ancient history. Now that makes it sound like my primary job is teaching English and history is just like a side hobby, something I'm interested in. Whereas, if anything, it's the opposite. I do teach English, but that's a very, very small part of my work. The vast majority of my work is writing about ancient history and medieval history. But that's just a relatively minor thing. That's not the big issue. There's a much bigger issue further down the article, in both the article about me and also the article about the Minoan hypothesis, where my views are mentioned. So in the article about me, it says, the Minoans were traders, not invaders. So if Crete was Atlantis, where is there mention of a war between Athens and the Minoans? And then on the page about the Minoan hypothesis, it says, the Minoans were primarily concerned with trading, not territorial expansion. When did they engage in a war with Athens or threaten Egypt? If Howells can answer that, he may have something relevant to build upon. Now, that was something that I wasn't too happy with seeing, because in the article, in one of the articles that is referenced here on both pages, so the writer of this definitely read it, I explained very clearly that the Mycenaean Greeks engaged in a war with the Minoans and defeated them, which is one of the crucial parts of the theory actually, because the Minoans, as far as I'm aware, are the only naval civilization that fought a war against Greece in the Bronze Age and was defeated. And that's a key part of the story of Atlantis. They fought a war against Greece and were defeated. Their empire was overthrown, and that matches very well with what happened with the Minoans. And I make a point of this in actually the first article that I wrote for Greek Reporter about this theory. I outlined that very clearly, and that very article is referenced in both entries on Atlantipedia, the one about me and the one about the Minoan hypothesis. So there's no I don't see how there could possibly be any confusion about the fact that I did address this issue. And yet here he's speaking as if I didn't address that, I just ignored that part of the legend, and that the Minoan hypothesis can't explain that aspect of it, which it very well can. But I thought, well, maybe there's just been some misunderstanding, maybe he just missed that bit. So I sent him an email. And in this email I also mentioned another issue. So in the article about the Minoan hypothesis, there's this statement here. In April 2023, a new attempt was made to breathe some life into the Minoan hypothesis I did like that, in an article on Greek Reporter. This unconvincing piece claims Plato describes in detail the Temple of Poseidon on Atlantis, which appears to be identical to the Palace of Knossos on the island of Crete. Then, in the following paragraph, it says that the same reporter did try again with another unconvincing piece supporting the Minoan hypothesis, also on the Greek Reporter site, in October 2023. This time he moved the focus of his claim to Santorini, where he now placed the Palace of Poseidon, relocating it from Crete. I suppose he will eventually make up his mind. Now that's interesting because in that article where I talk about Santorini, in the October article, I don't mention the Palace of Knossos anywhere. I don't mention the Temple of Poseidon. So I have no idea where the owner of the website, Tony O'Connell, where he got this idea from. I don't mention the Palace of Knossos or the Palace of Knossos or the Temple of Poseidon in that article. I only mention it in that article arguing that the Temple of Poseidon was identical with the Palace of Knossos on Crete. I have never been inconsistent about this. I even mentioned that in an article I wrote for What Culture in, I think it was 2020 or maybe 2021. I wrote an article for What Culture about the Minoan Atlantis theory, and I linked the Palace of Knossos with the Temple of Poseidon in that article too. I also made a video about this around that same time as well, in which I said the same thing. I have never been inconsistent about this, and since I didn't even mention the Palace of Knossos or the Temple of Poseidon in that October article, I have no idea where he got this from. It seems like it's something he's just made up, but I don't know why. But I thought, well, since there are these two very crucial factual errors, I thought, well, I'll send an email. Maybe there's just been some honest confusion, and so hopefully we can get this sorted out and the summary can be made accurate rather than inaccurate. Again, the fact he didn't agree with me is neither here nor there. That happens. But I did want the summary of my views to be accurate. So I sent an email, and we had a bit of a back and forth over a few weeks, all perfectly respectful. He's pleasant enough. But he just refused to change it. I don't know why. He just refused to accept that these objectively, factually inaccurate statements needed to be changed. So that was very disappointing, and it does make me question now the accuracy of the summary of other people's views in the articles on Atlantipedia. So that's a little bit concerning. Also, in that same email thread that we had, I mentioned that I was writing another article which highlighted some evidence from the Bible that actually supports the Minoan theory. Now, in this article, I talked about how the Bible describes how the Caphtorim from Caphtor, which is the biblical name for Crete, had invaded southern Canaan and conquered the people there, taken over their land. And since the people of Crete, in the time in which that account is set, were the Minoans, that would mean that the Minoans were conquerors. Even if you reject the Bible as a historical source, it shows that they were remembered as conquerors in the Bronze Age. So I pointed it out that I was writing this article, and then a few days later he responded saying that he'd seen it and he'd written about it. He'd added that to my page on his website. But then when I read it, I was surprised to say the least. So what he says is, in late January 2024, Howells expanded his efforts to bolster the Minoan hypothesis. This time, using some rather convoluted reasoning, he identifies ancient Crete as the Caphtor referred to in the Bible. Now, I did find this a rather confusing statement, since there's no convoluted reasoning in my article, certainly not regarding the reference to Caphtor being Crete. In fact, I don't present any reasoning at all. I just state that Caphtor in the Bible, in Hebrew, is Crete, which is the accepted opinion among scholars. There are a few divergent opinions, but the overwhelming scholarly consensus is that Caphtor is the Hebrew biblical name for Crete. So I don't see what convoluted reasoning he's referring to here. It seems like he's just made this up because he didn't agree with me. So again, disappointing and factually incorrect. And also he completely ignored the entire purpose of the article, which was to show that the Cretans of the Bronze Age, i.e. the Minoans, were remembered as violent conquerors. He just didn't mention that at all. So what's come through to me from his summaries of my articles is that it seems like it's not really a very reliable source. These articles are not written in good faith. And I say that as someone who has really enjoyed using Atlantipedia in the past because it's such a useful source to learn, or it seemed like such a useful source to discover what other researchers had written about the subject. But yet, even when presented with these factual errors, the owner of the site, Tony O'Connell, just refused to correct them. And as you've seen from his summary of my article about Kaftor and Crete, they're not written in good faith to show the actual arguments presented by the researchers, in this case me. So that's very disappointing, and I hope that maybe in the future some more accurate, good faith summaries of my arguments to do with Atlantis and the Minoans will be presented on his site, but that remains to be seen.